Are you getting?
Okay, we are live.
I think so.
All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to the City of Salem, the Salem URA Finance Committee meeting for October 21st. Member Gonzalez, and let the other members of the committee introduce themselves.
Member Barney. Sorry.
Linda Nishioka, alternate, but it looks like I might serve today.
All right, any members of the staff and members, other people visiting?
Josh Eggleston, Chief Financial Officer.
Keith Stilley, City Manager.
Krishna Namburi, Deputy City Manager.
Callie Langenbach, Budget Manager.
Dave Grewell, Fire Chief.
And Dan Atchison, City Attorney.
And Sherman Thomas, Admin and
Anya Hill, Treasurer.
And then
Perfect,
from Moss
thank you.
Adams.
Oh yeah, Moss Adams, yeah, Kelly, Tammy.
Tammy Lewis-Schweitzer with Moss Adams.
All right, thank you very much. Introductions are helpful because at the conference room, I can barely see the people in the back, so it's really helpful. Thank you for taking that time. And so first order of business. First order of business is approval of the minutes of our September 16th meeting.
I move approval of the September 16th minutes.
I'll second that.
Sounds good. Motion by Barney, seconded by Nishioka. Any other comment, or if not, approval, thumbs up. That motion passes. Okay. Any opposed? No. Okay. Let's see. Public comment. Anybody sign up for public comment, Josh?
No, not today.
Okay. And I see no other action items, so we'll move right into number 5, which is a management update information items. Josh, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have 3 items this afternoon, and we'll start off with an item from Moss Adams. Take it away, Tammy.
Okay, great. So we are back today following up on the September 16th meeting on our performance and internal audit scope of work. So we had a meeting with you all at that time to review what are our performance audits and got some feedback from you, and wanted to be able to circle back with this group on the updated information, updated prioritization based on your direction, in hopes that you will approve the remaining projects for this fiscal year 2025. So just as a reminder, performance audits are looking at efficiency and effectiveness. This is intended to be able to look at how are we using our available resources, how are we using those to be able to meet our goals and objectives, and are we really getting the most out of what we have available to us at the city. And these are conducted under generally accepted government auditing standards, which have a whole slew of requirements that we reviewed at the September meeting. So based on the discussion last time with this group around the project criteria, we made some updates and clarifications to this project criteria, specifically the items listed here in italics. So we're still looking at areas that are primarily funded by the general fund, looking at opportunities to increase efficiencies or cost savings, in particular with respect to the overall program budget and the FTE count. So you had all asked us to go away and indicate what is the functional budget and FTE count for each area included in our memo. And you can see that update in your packet, where for each item there is the budget, the FTE count, and a revised priority level based in part on that information. We were also looking at areas that have enterprise impact that align with your strategic goals and council priorities, and areas where disruption or degradation of service would have an enterprise impact or an impact on other programs and services at the city, as well as those that are mandated by law. So this is the project criteria that was applied to be able to inform our memo and our recommendations. So here we have listed the 3 high priority items. So the first you have already approved, that is the Enterprise Leadership Performance Audit. We are well underway in field work for that audit. We're meeting with many of you as part of that work. So that has already been approved by this committee. The next item is looking at IT. So that has a budget of just over $14 million and 60 FTEs. And so in this audit, we would be looking at the city's overall system environment and looking at priority investment roadmaps to be able to enhance operational efficiency across the city. So this sort of meets a lot of those elements as indicated in the project criteria, since if you have really well-functioning and integrated systems, you can certainly see more efficient operations. And then the next area is looking at fire. So here we have the fiscal year 2025 budget listed at just over $51 million, but we've also listed out the overall overtime budget that was incurred for the last fiscal year, which is just about $3.6 million. So what we're proposing here is to do an overtime and workload study following the EMS transition. So we would be looking at doing this probably in the spring of 2025. So these are the 3 projects that we would recommend the committee approve in today's meeting. That way we can work on these with city staff as capacity allows, but certainly wrap these up by June of 2025, June 30th. And then we also have a few of the medium priority areas if you wanted to be able to entertain those as well, but those would be for a future fiscal year. And I'm happy to take questions.
Mr. Chair, just real quick, for the record, Councilor Nordike and Councilor Gwynn have joined us.
Oh,
I have another question. On that prior slide, you noted 186 FTEs for the fire department. That does not include the 60 more positions we just approved as a council. Is that right?
This is for the fiscal year 2025 budgeted FTE. So if they were approved post July 1st, then this does not include that.
Yeah, we just did it. No worries.
Okay.
I believe the fire chief would like to make a comment. Is that okay, Mr. Chair?
Of course, fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Just quick question. You mentioned spring of 2025 following the EMS transition. The EMS transition won't take place until July of 2025. I think spring of 26 is probably more appropriate, just as a recommendation, because I mean, we're going to have a completely different fire department after July.
Okay. So the committee may wish to consider one of these other medium priorities, which are listed in order of prioritization here. So we had one looking at the urban renewal agencies to be able to do a performance audit, looking at the return on investment, the comparison to best practices, and really look at the sources and uses of funds to be able to really tell the story of the urban renewal agency and communicate that out to the community. So we could potentially sub that in for the fire overtime analysis.
So I
Tammy.
just held, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Chair Goose.
Oh, no,
Chair.
go ahead. Go ahead.
For URAs, Councilor Gwynn and I just held the South Salem Town Hall, and URAs did come up. So anecdotally, I can tell you there is interest in our community and understanding, frankly, questioning what the ROI is for URAs and knowing how much money is held back from the general fund as a result. So I think it would be useful to do that. This is not the only rumblings we've heard about our ROI, and I know there are other members of council, like Councilor Nishioka, who are interested in understanding our URA funding options as well. So I just want to throw that out there because we just had that annual town hall, and that was one of the questions that we got during the Q&A portion of the meeting.
I don't know if you can see me, Chair Gonzalez. This is Keith Staley. When you look at the URA and the budget of $5 to $6 million, I think that underrepresents the impact of the URA on the city's operations, both from a return back to the city's general fund as to the tax impact, but also the revenue generated by the URA and within the URA. So like Counselor Nordic was indicating, I think there would be a lot of value in this work.
Any other comments or questions for Tam?
No, I wanted to say, I agree with looking at the URA. I was wondering what the pink coloring meant, and so now I have a better idea. No, I really appreciate this whole table. I find it really, really helpful. In fact, I printed it off by itself just because the notes are really helpful to see what has been done and kind of where we are. So I wanted to say I really appreciate that. I have some other questions about some of the stuff further on, but I need to kind of round them up. I can't figure out a way to raise my hand in Zoom Workplace. Anyone? Yeah, I'll figure it out. I'll just wave if I need something. How's that?
Yeah, raise your real hand. Yeah.
Okay.
It's under React.
Councilor Gwynn, Councilor Nishioka, any comments or questions?
I don't, thank you.
Chair Gonzalez.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are we going to continue going through the appendix and the rest of the materials that are in the in our document?
We're happy to answer any questions that the committee has about the remainder of the document. I just want to confirm that from this committee, we have approval to move forward with the IT performance audit and the URA performance audit. If I could get clarity on that, that would be fantastic.
Does that answer your question, Member Varney?
Yeah, we'll get to some of my other questions later. So for right now, do we need a motion?
Well, I just want to make sure, Councilor Gwynn, any other comments, Councilor Gwynn, anybody else?
I was just going to, since it's hard to detect nods and such on screen, when Chief Gerbach mentioned spring of 26 as being a more appropriate time, I wholeheartedly concur with that. I think you need some time to allow all those new people to onboard after July 1 before you can get a meaningful assessment.
Yeah, thank you for that. I also agree with the fire chief. You know, there's going to be so much change, so many changes that it just to do this, and then we right against, you know, just so I agree with that. URA, I think it'd be great too. I think there's because of the budget issues, and we're just scrounging. You know, I think a lot of people have brought up the URA because it just looks like as a giveaway. So I think it'd be good for everybody for us to go through, and I can't imagine downtown what downtown would look like without the URA. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how that's paid off for us. You know, if it hasn't, I guess. But and yeah, the next one down would have been the police department budget, but because of that 2021 assessment they made, I think it's still, I think we probably won't see anything different. So I'm also in favor of the URA if it goes down that list of priorities.
Chair Gonzalez. So am I to understand that the benefit to the city, the general fund, is that 5 to 6 million annually from the URA? So if we change that, then that would increase the general fund availability by 5 to 6 million. Is that, am I understanding this correctly?
If I may, so the URAs, as they're currently structured, so, you know, in a nutshell, you open a URA, the tax base, the tax value is frozen at that point. Any increase above and beyond that frozen base, so whether it's the 3% that goes up every year or new development, gets captured by that urban rural area. So it's not just the general fund city portion, it's every other taxing jurisdiction, of which if you were to close all the URA areas, 5 to 6 million would come back on the rolls for the city of Salem general fund. And then the other amounts would go back to the other jurisdictions. So the advantage of the URA is not just that 5 to 6 million, it's the leverage of all the other taxing jurisdictions also. Is that
But I was just asking about general fund. So
Yeah.
the impact to the general fund, but you'd have to close all of them
That would be if you
to
closed all
benefit
of
from
them.
the 5 to
Yes.
6 million.
Yes, absolutely.
And can you even do that? Like all at once, or if you were to close the URAs, do they have to be done incrementally? Like,
So there's a couple things. You have to make sure there's no obligations on the area, so all debt must be satisfied. There's a few other things I'm sure Kristen would weigh in on, the things you want to make sure happen.
If I can clarify, we don't have to close all of the URAs or any of them for that matter, but yeah, the 5 to 6 million represents closing all of them. If we
I
wanted to
understand.
close one of them, it would be less than that.
Right.
But
understood. I'm just trying to make this make sense in my brain. So that's all.
and once we
And I
quit
know that's a
collecting
scary
increment,
place.
I'm sorry.
But
But once we quit collecting increment, we can't turn the faucet back on. So
right.
it's closed, it's permanently closed.
And I don't want you to have the impression, I'm just trying to understand. I'm not trying to say I want that to happen. I'm just trying to understand.
I think part of what we're identifying is that it's a really tricky and complicated question, and that might be the perfect right reason to look at it and help more people understand the complexity that is urban renewal. I also just want to share that some of you who serve on the bond steering committee have already identified the opportunity for urban renewal to come alongside bond funds for some of our projects. And so just be mindful that these implications are far reaching, right? Beyond just general fund impact. So it might be a worthy endeavor.
What might be a worthy endeavor?
Looking at it and
okay.
understanding it in more depth as a performance audit, because I think it is also true we have tried often to make urban renewal align with council and community goals in the strategic plan, and it's just another way we can do that work. It is isolated to geographic area, but we do find, especially in downtown, coming alongside some of our affordable housing projects, and so there's a lot of ways that urban renewal benefits some of the other council community objectives, but it is a great thing to better understand.
The other
Yeah,
tax
that's a great-
districts, those are folks like the Marion County school, school district and so on. I'm surprised they haven't been pressuring us to do something about this, because they would benefit too if we closed it.
So it's a pretty unique relationship because as the investment occurs in the area, the tax value goes up. So it's really a trade-off of you're giving up revenue for now for a greater return later. So, and I think the other taxing jurisdictions see that. So as long as the city's operating appropriately, not using those funds for things that don't increase the tax value, I mean, generally it benefits all the jurisdictions.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, before our URA funds and the other things that we've done, I mean, we've had vacant buildings, vacant blighted buildings, and nobody benefits from that. And yeah, to Chair Gonzalez's point, I can't imagine what downtown would look like without all of the investments we've made just within the last 10 years.
Thank you for that. And I think that's true. And Courtney brought up a good point that, this is us looking at it. This isn't us looking to cut. So I think we have to be careful because it could send the wrong message out there, especially with, headlines, and just want to be careful with that. Okay.
I'm sorry. Back to the URA again. So if the total impact of all the URAs is only $5 to $6 million in the general fund, why would we audit that? I guess what are we looking for exactly?
So if I may, Mr. Chair, it's $5 to $6 million annually. So every year it's $5 to $6 million. That's a pretty significant piece of revenue. If it were on the books, it would rank in the top 10 of revenue sources.
Okay.
So I mean, that's a significant amount of money for the general fund.
Every year. You could save a lot of jobs with that money. A lot of general funded positions could be covered with those funds. But it's complicated. It's not
And
that
also
easy.
it generates hundreds of millions of dollars a year for infrastructure improvements within areas that need infrastructure improvement. So
And who's
that
going to do
becomes-
that audit then?
Come
This
again?
would be Moss Adams.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay,
It'd be part of their scope of work.
got it.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, I think a motion would be helpful just to make sure we have the decision on record for the selection.
Okay. So anybody like to make a motion that we include the URA in the assessment?
I will. I move that we add the information technology and the urban renewal area departments onto the work plan for fiscal year 25 to 27.
I will second that motion.
Fantastic motion by Barney, seconded by Nordek. Any other comments or questions? Sorry, it's a little noisy over here, so I had to turn off my mic a little bit. Any other comments, questions, concerns? If not, all those in favor say aye or just thumbs up.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thanks, Josh, for that. All right,
Yep.
Tammy, back to you.
Okay. And then, Councilmember Varney, I believe you had some other questions on the appendix. I'm happy to answer those.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, on the first page in the appendix under reporting, I was wondering if there are going to be check-ins with the finance committee throughout the process, and then how often that would occur.
Sure. So typically when we're doing internal and performance audits, we will attend your regular meetings and provide a status update on where we're at with the projects that we're undergoing. And that status looks like, you know, we would say for enterprise leadership, we would say we're in field work. We anticipate completion in February of 2025 or January of 2025, ideally. And then what happens is you would get those reports. We can provide those status updates to you. And then whenever we are completed with the report, then the report comes to this committee for review and acceptance. And so you always receive the final reports in order to ask questions and provide response. So if you'd like for us to attend regularly to provide status updates, we're happy to work with staff to make sure that we can be on your agendas.
Okay, I know, I appreciate that because I was wondering about presenting a preliminary findings, and it says they'll present findings to the city, but I wasn't sure exactly who that meant for the preliminary part.
Yes, it's usually with city staff, and that's usually with whoever is sort of the overseer of that function. And so we work with them to make sure that we have the appropriate facts, we have the appropriate context, and that we aren't missing anything before that comes to this committee for review and approval. And we just present you with the final report. Everything else is sort of done between us and staff to make sure that we have the appropriate evidence to support our findings, and that we have provided recommendations that are actionable to the city. As part of our quality assurance process, we also have someone who is not involved in the performance audit come in and take a look at all of the work that we've done to verify that they would have come to the same conclusions in terms of findings and recommendations. And then we take that final product forward for the committee as well as for public consumption. So that is why we have those different sort of checks and balances in place along the way, to make sure we'll be providing you with the most practical and accurate information.
No, I really appreciate that because this is all very new to me. For example, when you're preparing the testing plan, can you give me an example of a risk area in a project? And then with a project, about how many risk areas do you look at typically?
Sure. So our typical process is that we'll first provide a document request list to the city, have them provide us with documentation so that we get a good understanding of whatever the situation might be in that department. So if we will take the example of fire overtime study, since we know that we're going to wait on that, we would request the last 3 fiscal years of budget to actual information for fire department personnel, look at the overtime that has been incurred, understand if there are trends in terms of which positions are incurring additional overtime or not. Also looking at if there's any documentation around the drivers behind that overtime. So we get a lot of that documentation. Then we move into our interviews. We talk with staff and we understand what's going well, where are opportunities for improvement, where are risk areas, where are potential redundancies or things that could be streamlined. How are we really looking at the use of all of our available resources? And then from the combination of the document request list and then the interviews, we then conduct a risk assessment to identify what are the areas that we should be digging deeper into. So that is an area where we may say, perhaps there is an increase in firefighters who are out sick. We saw that during COVID, for example, right? They were out in the public, they were getting ill more often, and so they were out more often, and so there was an increase in overtime associated with that. So that's where we're sort of identifying this is our hypothesis. We think that this is an opportunity for improvement, and then we identify what are the steps that we need to take in order to understand the scope of that opportunity, the impact of that opportunity, and whether or not that is an accurate characterization of what was going on. So to what extent was that really driving the increased overtime for a particular fiscal year or fiscal years. So we do all of that. We identify those risk areas. We don't have a set number of risk areas that we will look at. It really is dependent on what we hear and what comes sort of to our attention throughout the fact-finding phase of our work. So we're not limited to, we'll only look at the top 3 areas, for example. Instead, we sort of prioritize within the list and say, okay, we think that we should be able to address all of these areas. And if there are additional areas that come to our attention that we're not able to address within that specific scope, then we can indicate that within our executive summary to say, this is what this covered. There may be an opportunity to do additional analysis on, FMLA for firefighters or something. I'm making this up, right? And so that opportunity would be identified within the report. And if there are also any limitations in terms of the documentation or data that was available for us to review and perform those testing procedures, we also indicate that within the final report. Does that help answer that question?
Oh my goodness, that was so comprehensive. That was great information. Now I have a better idea because it went all the way through identifying to analysis to going further. So I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
In my mind, though, it created a question in my mind because of all of those examples that all had to do with the fire department. And so I guess I'm confused because we already have a consultant, Triton, who's looking at the fire department stuff. So I just want to make sure we're not focusing there because we are moving to a different EMS system for the very reason that we had so much overtime. So I just want to make sure we're not focusing on the fire department with this because I feel like it's a completely different circumstance.
Yes, so this committee has approved us doing a performance audit on IT and the urban renewal agencies. Those are the projects that will be moving forward for this fiscal year. I only use the fire department overtime example for illustrative purposes of it's all scope dependent in terms of what we're looking at. And so that was just an example that I had used to describe our methodology.
Thank you.
And if I may, I think we'll bring this back to the finance committee when we're nearing the point we need to select more. So whether that's spring of next year or a different time, we'll bring it back so that if you don't want to go with the fire overtime, you can pick something else. I will say that Triton looked at EMS. They didn't necessarily look. They did look at fire overtime generally. But not quite in the same way Moss Adams might. So that's something that we could come back and answer if it was something the finance committee.
I just felt like it was being focused
sure
a lot on the fire department, and I was thinking, okay, that seems to me like we're dealing with a lot of those issues just by virtue of the fact we're bringing the EMS
Yeah.
in-house.
And maybe that overtime goes down and you
That's
choose
my
not to
hope.
prioritize it.
That's
Yeah.
my hope, so.
Perfect. Oh, Councilor Nordic.
Thank you. I know the motion we just approved, does this have to go through city council, or are we just approving these performance audits and not requiring a vote by full council on that?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So this scope is something that's assigned to the finance committee. So no, it's not going to the city council after this.
Works for me.
Do we know how much these audits are going to cost?
It's going to vary based on the area. I mean, we could come back with an estimate. Courtney, do you want to speak to the amount we're allocating total?
I would, but I would also like to study
Okay.
before I would respond, because I don't trust my memory at this moment. But this is part of our annual relationship that we have with Moss Adams, and so we have a bunch of other things we're doing. I can't speak specifically to how much the performance audit and assessment work is, but I could if I come back.
I'm curious.
And Courtney, when you come back, did we already budget for this performance auditing in our current budget?
Yes.
Yes.
So you're not anticipating something you'd have to come back to us and approve above and over that?
No,
Okay, great.
we were imagining reprogramming of priorities based on what we've been hearing. We've been hearing a lot of interest in better understanding how the city is controlling its costs and thinking about doing work better, more efficiently, and more effectively. We already have this relationship and we have this opportunity to reprogram how we were planning to spend the year so that we answer some of these very questions.
Thank you.
Okay, Tammy, are you anything else for us? Are you?
No, thank you so much for having me today.
Thanks so much, Tammy. Thank you. All right. Josh, back to you for the draft 5-year forecast validation scope.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to share my screen real quick. For the committee, just a little context. We're planning to deliver a preliminary general fund 5-year forecast to the budget committee on October 30th. And I will stress the word preliminary because things are continuing to change. Even every couple days, we learn a little bit more information. So I expect there to continue to be changes from when we deliver on October 30th to the final version in January. But what this piece is we developed a scope of work that we'd like to engage with several different firms. We'll offer the scope to several different firms and we'll get bids on that work. So we wanted to see what the finance committee, since it's really in your realm, this piece of work, the 5-year forecast, if this scope for the general fund 5-year forecast validation seemed right, if there were things they should focus on, if there's things we should change. Timing is a factor with this, so we're going to finalize the forecast in the next week, the preliminary forecast, and then just in order for the firm to actually be able to do the work, we need to be able to get bids pretty rapidly. So we'd like to settle on it today. And if you haven't had a chance to review it, it's really not a problem. We're really just, I mean, it's fairly basic what we're asking for. You know, the forecast is built up of a lot of assumptions. We'd like them to validate the assumptions, both on the revenue side, the expenditure side, review any methodologies that we use. So this would be similar to what Moss Adams did a couple of years ago. We're not limiting the work to Moss Adams, though. We'd like to shop it around to multiple firms. I'm not expecting it to be over $25,000, so it's something we can do without an RFP.
Any questions for Josh from the committee? Member Varney?
Thank you, Chair. The question I had was on the benchmarking. How do you determine which cities or industries or whatever municipalities you're going to use for the benchmarking?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. It would probably be dependent on the firm that's selected, what methodology they'd want to choose for that. The city generally has benchmark cities in Oregon, but that might not be the best in this case because not all cities do the same 5-year forecasting that we do, or they operate on a biannual budget. So it's really not a comparable practice. So it might be shopping around a little bit to see which cities have comparable practices.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody in the conference room, and they could just speak up because I really can't see you, so I trust you.
Hi, Chair. I don't know how a firm could account for this, but legislative money. Sometimes we get $10 million from the legislature in one-time funding, which we use towards sheltering and helping out with all the services to address homelessness in our area. And some years we don't get any such special funding, which makes it really hard to predict. I'm already hearing rumors about what the governor will be putting in her proposed budget, but those are just rumors at this point, of course. If she does prioritize housing and sheltering, as she probably will that money come to city governments or will it go to regional fixes? I'm seeing a nod for a little birdie's telling me it's going to be probably more regional in nature. Courtney, did you want to share anything with the class?
What I think we're hearing and understanding so far is that it will, any future funding for homelessness services or prevention is likely going to be following some of the other funds that are going towards counties. So there's going to be probably some kind of a shift. We should anticipate a shift in how those services are funded.
Right. Thank you so much. That's really helpful. Yeah. So I don't know to what extent you can predict for that sort of thing when the legislature can be an inherently unpredictable place. But to the extent they can wrap their heads around that and look at trends, to the extent that's even useful, because the legislature itself changes all the time. So it's one of those places where history isn't as reliable a predictor of the future. But I just throw that out there because, you know, I've been on council long enough to know that what we get year by year just varies enormously. And it makes it so hard for our staff and for any city staff for that matter to budget accordingly.
Yeah, and if I may, the homeless services portion of the city budget is outside the general fund, so it won't fall into this scope. There are some grants that we do forecast for, but they're long-time grants. You know, they're grants from like the Department of Justice that we receive every year, things like that. But if it's a one-time legislative ask, it's not something that we're going to forecast or budget for until we actually know it's coming. Maybe even not until we get the actual wire, because it can either timing or circumstances can change so quickly in that realm. We have to be able to count on it. But that is something I think that could be part of the validation. Just looking at one-time revenues and if that's displayed appropriately, things like that, where you're not counting dollars before they're actually getting there.
Any other questions for staff? And, you know, Josh, real quick, my comment, and you pretty much answered it, but, you know, as far as revenue assumptions, and I'm just sort of part of it is what Councilor Nordyke mentioned, you know, the one-timers, but also, you know, we're just with the revenue issues in front of us, you know, I just curious how that's going to be done, but so I guess it's great that it's named revenue assumptions, but just wanted to hear what that might, you know, how that might look like.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and we're going to be talking about assumptions here in a minute. You know, our draft preliminary, I don't know how many more things I can put on it. You know, we're going to talk about those here in a second. But what this firm will do is just check for, you know, is it rational? Is it reasonable? Does it make sense? Is it something you can actually, you know, count on? You know, no one has a crystal ball and knows exactly what's going to happen. So you might hear me say this, but the moment you publish a forecast is when it's wrong. You know, it's not going to be correct. It's really used to identify issues, systemic, long-term issues. So it's not trying to predict the future because no one's going to be able to do that. But we try to get a general idea of trends, so we can solve them ahead of time.
Yeah, Josh, this scope of work looks good to me. It's comprehensive. It's, you know, so it looks good to me. Any other thoughts or questions before we move on to the next part? Which are those assumptions? Anybody else? I think we can move on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm passing something around the room, and I'm hoping all of you got this in your email box if you're here with us virtually. It was just sent, so you should have it here in a second.
I got it.
Excellent. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, I'll be sharing it and walking through it. These are hot off the press. Callie was working on it. I saw the file was saved at 4:10 this afternoon. So the most recent information we have. I will tell you, you know, things are continuing to change. We'll update the finance committee as we get further. But I just wanted to walk through this to see your reaction. You know, I tend to be a little more on the conservative side. Others might be more on the, hey, let's be a little more optimistic about revenue and expenses. And on our team, we have some of both. So we try to hit a neutral ground where we're trying to be realistic. So here on the top, expenditure assumptions table, you can see our wage projections for each of our bargaining units. We do have some bargaining units that are being ratified on the 28th, and those assumptions are included here. That includes AFSCME there at the top, the city attorneys, SPEW and SPEW-S. SPEW-S is the sergeants, the police union, the battalion chiefs for the IFF, and then fire IFF. And just for clarity, if it has a slash through it, it means it's getting a 3% increase in January and a 3% increase in July. So it's split between the year. And then you can see non-rep there toward the bottom, a 4% cost of living adjustment, a 1% market adjustment, and then PCEA. And then after the contracts are closed, you see everything kind of stabilizes at that 3%, which is generally what we're projecting for our inflation factor, consumer price index factor. So I'll pause there and see if there's any questions on wage projections. This is a big part of our work because it drives so many of our other costs. So a lot of things, you know, taxes, FICA Med, PERS are really based off the wage projection. So a small change here has a ripple effect throughout the budget.
Josh, would you say, as a general rule, this 3% increase, is that competitive with comparable cities? This might also be a Krishna question too.
It is kind of low as we look at the market right now, but we also have to wait and see what it is that's going to follow. So, but it is kind of somewhere in the middle is what I would say.
Yeah, wages are difficult for us because it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we put something in here, it ends up happening. So generally, we want to keep it on a reasonable inflation factor. Even 3% might be a little high for inflation. Things are really calming down as far as inflation goes. So right now, we're seeing pressure above 3%, but we're hoping it stabilizes to 3% or below in the out years of the forecast.
So if I may add a couple of things. So when depending on when we negotiate the contracts, like if you look at, AFSCME, the contract ended this year. So the last 3 years, whatever the cost of living increases that they got, it's not necessarily in comparison to the inflation. So that's kind of where the time that you're negotiating the contract, but the biggest factor is really the other cities and how and the state and how their cost of living increases are being and where they are at the compensation level. So that kind of determines where there are several factors that play. We just kind of have to see how it is when we negotiate.
And it is a pretty small world, you know, when you talk about municipalities. I have a group, and I know Krishna has a group of, you know, large cities in Oregon that we meet with, and it really is pretty fluid. where employees interchange between the different municipalities. And a lot of it has to do with the cost of living and the benefits that are offered.
So I would just state that I know 5-6 years ago, whenever we would be discussing employees at our clinic, we were pretty much on a 2 or 2.5 increase. That was sort of, so would that be what used to be? And now we're seeing that it's going up because of such high inflation and again, you know, requests for the union's contracts. They're just kind of adding into it.
Yeah, it's just basically what the market is demanding. So before it was like even 1.5 sometimes, and also 0% cost of living increases for management. That was kind of how we operated. But right now, I don't think that's practical. I don't think this is sustainable because we ended up with a huge compression issues. But we're still kind of handling that. So we have to be, you know, kind of watching how the rest of the market is moving with the compensation, and we kind of adjust it. And it's every year it's a new thing. We just kind of have to wait.
It's a new thing. It's a new day.
Yeah, but you're right. If you pull the 5-year forecast from 5 years ago,
Yeah.
you know, you'll see it, you know, a 2% in there or a 1.5. You know, it used to be much different. Yeah, but we're really at the mercy of the economy.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions for Josh on this? Okay. We can move on, Josh.
Okay, moving on, other personal services costs. These are, again, a pretty big driver for our business. We're looking at our PPO medical plan. So this is the self-insured plan that we offer employees, Kaiser Medical, dental, also the PPO, Willamette Dental, and then vision. Those are kind of the health and medical benefits there at the top. Workers' compensation. I mean, the council's very aware of things that are happening there. You know, you've heard about an executive session and claims that have been paid out. We have an extreme problem in workers' compensation. That's why we're looking at a significant increase there, followed by some steady increases. And this is just trying to get us back to a point where we have a reserve level for the workers' compensation cost center. Life insurance, disability insurance, those are flat. And I'll just pause there to see if there's any questions on that section.
Any questions for Josh?
I had a quick question. What percentage of the medical do employees pay?
They pay 5% generally.
Okay.
I think police is a little different. They have a $65 contribution per pay period. It's very unique and been there for a long time.
Which is once a month.
Twice. Well, it's bi-weekly, so there's 2 months where it's 3 times.
Thank you.
Is our workforce is our median age creeping up, staying flat, going down? Because I know that tends to affect insurance rates. If you know.
Do we have that? I don't have an idea. I think we're seeing increased claims costs, and I think it's on both ends of the spectrum. You know, if you listen to Kaiser or our consultant, it's on the older side and on the younger side, people who are having babies and things like that. So you see both sides of the claims.
It's often higher if you have more females.
Moving on, if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, let's move on.
The next section is very impactful, and I can't stress it enough. The PERS rates on eligible earnings. These are handed to us by the PERS board by the state of Oregon. And they came in a lot higher than we were expecting. We expected a 1% increase, and I think we saw an average of 5%. So just the general fund, the impact, I pulled this tidbit that you'll get an early view. You know, it's $6 million for the general fund was the impact of that 5% increase for PERS rates per year. Above and beyond where we expected fiscal year 2026 to be last year.
That's not a good thing.
That was discussed at the League of Oregon Cities conference. They discussed that a bit about PERS. And the comment from the presenter was basically, we just have to let the older people utilizing it to finally be gone.
Die.
To die, and then things will calm down for the state.
It sounds morbid, but you're absolutely correct. So if you watch the actuarials present on this, the tier 1, 2 employees, which are some are well into retirement, and the balance are getting closer. I'll say that nicely. That system, those 2 plans are the ones with the large unfunded liability.
Yeah.
The OPSERT plan, the pared down benefit, does not have the unfunded liability. So the PERS rate that we pay for the normal cost, the basic amount, almost fully funds that program. The unfunded liability is related to the tier 1, 2 employee.
So the impression was that the state's not going to do anything about changing PERS, and that it's going to just let those older tier 1 and 2 finally die, and that then it'll settle out better for.
My mother is a tier 1 employee, just so you know.
So I'm sorry.
It's fine, it's fine. I can do joke.
And I'm not going to criticize the state. The state's tried
Yeah.
several different times to reform PERS, and they've been marginally successful. There are some things that have improved. But at the end of the day, the benefits were promised to these employees, a lot of whom are already
And
retired.
it's in the Constitution, from what I understand, or something was talked about that it was a contract given and that they can't change it.
Yeah, it's gone to court, and they've affirmed those things. So that's why when you look at newer employees with the OPSERT plan, that one's much more balanced, much more well-funded, not well-funded, but it doesn't have that liability out there. The benefits are more reasonable.
Josh, what explains the change between 27 and 28, the 5% increase, one from 24%?
Yeah.
29.
So one thing that's happening, and then we'll come back to the finance committee, is in 2005, the city was part of a co-op, if you will, and we issued PERS obligation bonds. So every year we get assessed, they're calling it a side account rate relief. So we took a chunk of money and it's invested at PERS, and they pull some off every year as a credit to our PERS rates. So what happens in December of fiscal year 28 is those PERS rates, that side account goes away. We're hoping to have a balance that we can reinvest back as a side account, but not necessarily so that 7% rate credit that disappears, which is why you see a bigger increase between those years. But we also don't pay the debt service anymore, so there is a net
Gain from that.
an impact that happens there. So the debt service goes away, but the side account does also.
It shifts the cost.
Okay, so it nets out in which direction?
We'll end up paying a couple more percent that we're currently
That's a lot
saving.
then.
Yeah. But we're also hoping, depending on when earnings happen, that there's still, $10, $20 million there that we can reinvest as a side account. So they amortized it. And if there's a balance left over, they'll give us options for how to treat those.
Okay.
And that's something we'll bring back to the finance committee.
And a lot of that's not known yet. They're still developing the structure of, because a lot of different jurisdictions are in the same circumstance.
Yeah, there's a whole slew.
Things to
Probably.
worry about.
Yeah,
100 plus issued in that same 2005 range. It's not something we'd recommend doing again. It's not a best practice at this point because it can go really well like it has for us. But there's other examples where, the earnings fell off the next year and you've ended up having the negative effect, for that full 20 years.
I wanted to do a time check. It's about 1 minute to 5. So anything else, Josh, for us on this one that stood out to you that you wanted some feedback on, or what's the question here? You just wanted to run this information by us?
Just running it by you, just so you're aware of what's happening. We don't have to walk through everything else, but there is a materials and services section. And then also the revenue section. And I would say this is more preliminary, the general fund revenue. this is one that we continue to adjust as we get closer and get better information. But there aren't really any large surprises for the general fund revenue. Callie and I walked through it earlier, and things are trending in similar directions. It's still not enough to cover our costs, but there's no major shifts.
Yeah, I think especially since we just sort of received this document a little bit ago, you know, I think I invited every committee member to sort of go through it and definitely check back in with staff, you know, on any questions they have. It's a great document. I'm definitely going to take a little more time to look at it myself.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have questions or feedback, just reach out to us.
I mean, it's 5 o'clock. Anybody want to throw a quick question out or comment? I don't want to take that away from everybody, anybody.
Why is cable franchise a negative 2%?
People are cutting the cord. They're not enrolling in cable service as much. So, I mean, we saw a plateau and now we're seeing it decreasing.
So that means people are streaming versus, so is there a way to,
Get streaming?
yeah. No,
So,
I mean,
so not currently, we're
Like-
exploring
so
options.
like internet, you know, I mean, is
Yeah.
there a
There's no internet
Internet?
franchise.
franchise? Yeah,
No.
that's,
It's locked up pretty tight.
I've been hanging on. I'm not sure I'm going to anymore.
All right. Well, I think
Big Comcast bill.
we definitely got a lot done today. So yeah, and I'll see most of the people shortly. But unless there's anything else, meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.